To be honest with you, I don't like to talk about it much. I don't share a lot of it. And it's just primarily because I'm really embarrassed and ashamed of what happened to me and what I went through. And I guess when I moved from Albany to Perth, I tried to completely rebuild my life in a way that it was actually designed of who I wanted to be and who I wanted to hang around and what I wanted out of life, not just this small town mindset of how everyone's always known you and then they just compare you to the person you were in high school and you never get to kind of grow outside of this box that they put you in. Now, the relationship that I have with my family today is so beautiful and incredible. We are very close. We tell each other everything and we've just been on this massive journey, but it wasn't always like that. Hello and welcome back to another episode on the Beauty Industry Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, Sammy Kennedy. Now, recently I got interviewed to have part of my story told in a book that should be getting released towards the end of the year. The book is primarily about our pet bull, Brucey Brahman. If you haven't looked him up on Facebook, type him into the search bar. You're going to be absolutely blown away by the content of this bull. He goes for walks down the beach and all sorts of mischief. But basically, throughout all the years of Bruce's journey growing up that Dad has shared, he has attracted a lot of attention and PR. And this author, Diana Thurgood, she came across Bruce and she loved the relationship that my dad and him had. And she asked if she could write her second book about that relationship because the first book she'd done is called Second Chance, and it's about the relationship between this lady and a horse, and then she wanted to kind of do the same thing with a man and his bull to be able to contrast it. Anyways, she's written this book and there's been about 5 revisions of it, but she keeps getting rejected by publishers, and the feedback was that they needed more of a female perspective because primarily the audience will be female. So there needed to be challenges, there needed to be struggles, there needed to be a conflict of such. And so my mum and I had more of our parts added into the story. And it was quite interesting getting interviewed because she was asking a lot about my childhood and what it was like, especially in those high school years, because that is when Dad bought Bruce. And to be honest with you, I don't like to talk about it much. I don't share a lot of it. And it's just primarily because I'm really embarrassed and ashamed of what happened to me and what I went through. And I guess when I moved from Albany to Perth, I tried to completely rebuild my life in a way that it was actually designed of who I wanted to be and who I wanted to hang around and what I wanted out of life, not just this small town mindset of how everyone's always known you and then they just compare you to the person you were in high school and you never get to kind of grow outside of this box that they put you in. Now, the relationship that I have with my family today is so beautiful and incredible. We are very close. We tell each other everything and we've just been on this massive journey, but it wasn't always like that. And in my high school years, I went down a path of self-destruction. I had basically no relationship with either of my parents. We fought a lot. I was definitely the rebellious teenager. And I guess as I was getting interviewed and sharing a few of the things that I had done or that had happened to me, I was actually blown away by how much I've actually completely turned my life around and changed things. And I guess that's what inspired me to talk about this on an episode, is because I know for us as women, as business owners, as entrepreneurs, we go through some pretty hectic stuff. And that could be in your childhood, it could be in high school, it could be when you're starting a business, dealing with customers, employees. It could be having a family. Like, there are just so many events that happen throughout our lives that can actually be quite traumatic, and trying to stay positive or find a way to get through them and completely shift the narrative of being stuck in this negative state to then building something that is successful, impactful, powerful. Sometimes, man, it feels so hard. And it wasn't until I was looking back at where I'd come from and all the crap that I'd been through to get to where I am today that I realized I have grown so much as a person. And it's ultimately the reason why I do business the way I do, why I put the effort into creating these podcast episodes for you, and why I believe that business can be done with integrity and to treat people how you'd like to be treated, not just be in it because you're upset at the world and you want to punish people or you just want to make money and go fuck you. And there's just so much more that we can get out of life when we choose to be the hero and not the victim in our own stories. So before I go into my own personal journey, I want to talk about this concept, and I actually wrote notes on it because I wanted to get it right, firstly, but learned helplessness. It was something that I first came across when I was doing psychology units at uni, and the story that I was told, well, it's not a story, it's a study that was done, but basically they had all these crickets in a bucket. And so the crickets, they're in a bucket and they can jump out. They've got the power to do that. Their legs are strong enough. If they just jump, they'll be out of the bucket. And what the scientists did is they put a lid on the bucket. And so what happened is they could see through the glass and see that the crickets would keep jumping and hitting the lid. And then over time, they kept jumping and they would just jump below where the lid was so that they wouldn't hurt themselves. And then what happened is those crickets reproduced. They had a second generation. And those crickets, again, they would only jump just below where the lid was. And so over time, as these crickets kept reproducing, no one would ever jump above where the lid would go. And so they took the lid off to see if the crickets would actually jump out, and they didn't. And you know why? It's because all they'd ever seen is the generations above them only reach that certain point. And so this can happen in our own lives, whether it is just being a business owner. If everyone else in your family has been an employee, then that kind of sets the bar of what you think might only be possible for you. Now, if you've come from a background where there's been drugs, alcohol, violence, then that's sometimes what you only believe that you'll ever have in your life. And I guess this all comes back into my story about like self-worth and boundaries and figuring out like who you are and what you want, and then creating the identity, stepping into that and showing up as that person, rather than just letting every single situation in your life dictate who you are. You actually choose how you're going to show up, and that is what creates the life. So back in the 1960s, there was a scientist, and his name was Martin Seligman, and he ran experiments to study behavior and control. Now, this is probably one of the most inhumane, horrible studies done, but basically they had dogs and they put them in kennels, and there was two groups. So one of the groups of dogs, they were in this kennel that would have these electric shocks, but if they pressed their paw onto the panel, it would stop shocking them. Now, the second group of dogs, they were put in a kennel, but it just randomly shocked them. And no matter what they did, whether they tried to press something or whether they tried to get out or sit still, they would just keep getting shocked randomly. So for this first experiments, the dogs with the control that were able to touch the panel, they learned that if I do something, I can stop this. Whereas the dogs without the control that were just randomly getting zapped all the time, they learned that nothing I do will make a difference. Now, they ended up running a second test, which is where it actually gets very like, whoa, this is hectic. But all the dogs were then taken out of those kennels they were initially placed in, and they were put in a new kennel which had this low barrier. So this low barrier meant that they could easily jump over and escape the shock. So they could actually get out if they wanted to. Now, they started doing the same tests with the shocks coming through, and the dogs who previously had control, they just jumped out immediately. They were able to get out of there. Whereas the dogs who had no control, the ones that just kept getting randomly shocked, they didn't even try. And this is what's heartbreaking, is that because in previous circumstances where no matter what they did, nothing worked, they just kept getting randomly shocked. These dogs eventually laid down. They just kept taking the shocks. They were whining and they accepted the discomfort, even though the escape was right there and easy. And so the learnings from this experiment is that the dog itself hadn't lost the ability to be able to escape that situation, but it had learned that no matter what they did, their actions didn't matter. So instead of trying, they became passive. And so when someone like yourself repeatedly experiences a lack of control, what can happen is that they learn to stop trying, even when change is possible. And so the reason why I tell you this story about the dogs and the crickets is because this can happen to us as business owners. And when I was looking back on all the things that I'd been through to get to where I am today, a lot of my business success has probably come from trauma, to be honest with you. Trying to prove that I'm not the person I used to be because I wanted to become successful. I wanted to have a positive impact. I didn't want to be, I guess, put in that same box of what everyone thinks you are when you're in a small town or when you're at high school. When I was in those teenage years, I had some really terrible things happen early on. One of them being a sexual assault, and then the second one being a modeling situation where I thought I was going to take off with my modeling career, and I got manipulated by someone who was actually quite well known at the time and had a big media presence, saying that I could kickstart my modeling career. And basically this turned into wanting to take nude photos of me when I was 13 and getting taken on this shoot, told to take my clothes off, and basically if this didn't happen, then my career wasn't happening. And so being that young and not really having a good relationship with your parents, not really having anyone to ask for help, not being able to talk to anyone, it was one of those things that I just went through. And I think looking back now, I realized that it made me feel like men had control over me and that I also didn't have much self-worth. Like modeling was the one thing that if I put my body out there, I would be validated. Therefore, I would be loved and accepted. And that became a really toxic thing that made me spiral a lot, because when you have low self-worth, you try so hard to do things that will either get you attention, give you validation, and make you feel like you are accepted or popular or cool. And so throughout my high school years, because those two events happened really early on, and I guess I didn't really process or know the extent of the harm of what they would do to me, I started using drugs. And it just started off with weed at first, but then it became a bit of a slippery slope where I was doing MDMA, I was doing LSD, I did cocaine, pills, and I think part of it was just trying to escape and numb myself and not feel anything. And then the other part of it was just trying to be cool and trying to be accepted, and it just didn't work out for me. And then at the same time of all of this going on, you know, my parents were really struggling in business. We had a partnership go wrong. We had no money, and we were constantly stopping and starting and launching things. And then I didn't have a relationship with my dad. We were so close when I was growing up. We'd go surfing all the time. And that's probably about the time that he got Brucey and he put all his time and energy into that. I never got along with my mum because we were polar opposites. And, you know, going through all of this and those high school years, that then pushed me to be the rebellious teenager that dates someone that, you know, your parents would hate. And I then found myself in a really toxic relationship where I was getting controlled and manipulated. Like I'm talking, he would stalk me on Snap Maps to check my location. And if I didn't ride my moped fast enough home and I was at Woolworths for too long, it's like, are you cheating on me? Are you doing this? And then there were other parts where if I realized that I was getting gaslit and I was like, okay, I'm ready, I'm going to leave this guy, he would threaten to commit suicide. And it was just like really intense. And I ended up going to a psychologist, and he actually spoke to me about the shark cage analogy, which is basically women who are exposed to domestic abuse. And so male perpetrators, they will show certain signs, they will show us up in a certain way, they will say certain things. And if you have ever been in a situation like that, I would actually highly recommend you look it up, because it does have this almost like a checklist of signs. And what I realized at that time is that I was almost believing that I was always in the wrong. And I thought I was going crazy because this person was blowing up at me all the time and I was trying to do the right thing. And even with my parents, like being in this toxic relationship, I couldn't talk to them. And then I would almost get in my parents' good books and look like I was doing well. And then I would just do something stupid. Like I was healing my relationship with my parents. And I remember one night I drove all the way into town without a license. And then about 2 minutes away from home, I crashed my friend's car. And just having to tell them that, and I don't know, there was just a lot of things where I was like, oh, what am I doing? And it was like I kept putting myself in those situations as well. And as much as I knew I could be better and I knew that I should be showing up in a different way, part of me just kind of accepted that I was this failure. And so the behaviors, the actions, the things that I would do, the people that I would hang out with, they were all losers and they were all bad for me. But I didn't believe that it was possible for me to be better. I didn't believe that I was worthy of doing good things for myself, of a healthy relationship. I think that there was a lot of stuff where I just felt like I'd hit rock bottom. And I don't know if sharing this is really relevant to where you're at right now, but I do believe that every single one of us will sometimes go through a situation in our lives where we almost keep choosing the things that are not great for us. And whether we realize we're doing it consciously or subconsciously, what happens is this whole learned helplessness pattern. And no matter how hard we try to break free, it just feels like life has got everything against us. After going through a series of events, which I'm honestly not proud of, there was this opportunity where I got to leave Albany and restart my life. And I was so excited for it. I realized that at school, you're kind of forced to hang out with these people who you may not actually choose to hang out with. If you're an adult and you have your own set of beliefs and values and interests, you're just kind of like forced to be friends with this group of people. Anyways, I found when I moved to Perth, I left that toxic relationship and I was able to get a fresh start. And that's all I wanted. I wanted people to see me for who I am, not who I was in my past. And what did I do? I went and formed friendships with those toxic people again. And I repeated the same habits where there was a second sexual assault. There was also a situation where I actually ended up falling pregnant, which I don't really talk about because it's not something that, it's your own choice at the time. But I never was able to tell my parents about it when it happened because they were Christian. And so I created this whole story in my head once again that I was just healing my relationship with them, on a good path, going to uni, and now I've fucked up again. And that really made me realize that all of these things that I was doing was just because that was what was comfortable and safe. And being in toxic friendships, being around drugs and partying and all the things that kind of numb you from the pain, that was my escape. And so after I went through those two big things, I was about 18 years old. I realized something has to change and I can't keep living like this because my whole life will start to self-destruct if I continue this path. Like I have done so many terrible things to myself that I don't actually deserve this. And even though I didn't feel like it felt right that I was saying I don't deserve this. I had to believe it because I had to change. And I ended up cutting off everyone that was no good for me, that was a bad influence, that, you know, those friends that like don't truly appreciate you for who you are and they're just kind of using you to climb the social ladder. I guess that's kind of what it was like being in that influencer life too, like being around, you know, famous people and feeling like, oh yeah, you're the coolest, hottest in thing, but not really, because everyone is just trying to seek this validation and trying to be accepted, and they're empty inside. And even people with money, it's like they don't have purpose. And so I let go of all these toxic relationships and friendships. And then I started my business and I poured all my time and energy into my business. And so that was the beauty salon at the time. And I was also studying to become a doctor of Chinese medicine. So I had these different areas of my life where I was trying to be better, but then, you know, after I'd fallen pregnant, and because I wasn't able to get any help with that, I went through this whole situation where I didn't know what to do. And I had my whole life flash before my eyes going, oh my gosh, like what if I never finish my degree? What if I never travel? What if I never start the business? And like, this is my whole life. And I spiraled. It gave me a huge amount of perspective about all the things I wanted to achieve. And then I didn't end up feeling like I could go through with it. It just wasn't something that I was ready for. And I knew from a financial and emotional perspective, I just was not ready to have a kid. So I didn't go ahead with that. And that was also another traumatic thing within itself. Like I went to go to the clinic and then there was nothing showing up, even though the pregnancy tests were all positive. And then the risk of it being ectopic because I'd taken a morning after pill, like that was just a whole bunch. And then coming off the pill, that was the whole thing, like hormones out of whack, like just everything in my life was not in a good place. I decided, all right, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to focus on business. But then with the stresses of business, I ended up smoking weed a lot during COVID. And at first it was just a fun thing, but then it was like to literally numb off from the traumatic experiences that I'd had. And it was just like every time I think I would start doing something good for myself, I would just go 10 times further backwards. And I don't know at what point I realized that none of this was sustainable, but I know what saved me, and it was actually business, because business became an opportunity for me to actually prove that I was good at something. And I poured all my time, my energy, my focus into business. And there came this realization where if I want to have a successful business, I can't be hanging around with losers. I can't be doing drugs, and I definitely can't be in a position where I don't think I'm good enough, because you have to believe that you're good at what you do in order to have the conviction to sell yourself. And through the journey of business, I struggled. It wasn't easy. I started from home and I failed. And I guess that whole fear of failure, because of all the family businesses we've had, at that point in time, we'd had 7, and some had stopped and started over again, and some made money, some didn't. And I didn't want to turn out like my parents and be a failure in business. And then I started investing in personal development, and that's probably the moment that everything started to shift. I did neuro-linguistic programming, and I initially did that with the thought that I will help other people with it, but it actually helped me the most because I became so aware of all the situations that were playing out in my life. So things that were repetitive, toxic behaviors, patterns, people, what created safety for me. And that's when I realized this whole part about embodying the identity of the person that you want to be. And a lot of people just wait to suddenly have this shift or realization that, okay, now I'm this person. But the way that you actually become the person you want to be in 5 years is that you write all those things down, like how do they show up? How do they speak? How do they dress? Who do they hang out with? What do they do with their time? What do they value? What do they believe about themselves? You write all these things out so you can actually see it physically in front of you. And then you start showing up as if you were that person. And at first, you do get that imposter syndrome. You do feel like a bit of a fraud. But let me tell you, when you start doing it consistently over and over again, it starts to actually become you. When I started looking at, okay, who do I need to become? I started thinking, okay, well, I need to become someone who reflects a lot on situations so that I'm picking things up as they happen in real time. I had to become someone who actually respected myself and held boundaries. And so I wrote down all the times in my life where I'd made mistakes or I'd been walked over or I'd ended up in a situation where I honestly shouldn't have and could have easily been avoided if I did something differently. And so I got clear on like, where are these toxic patterns and blocks and situations coming up from, and what behavior of mine needs to actually change. And so I started putting in place boundaries. I started holding myself to a certain standard. And this kind of became like my moral compass of how I showed up, not only as a person, but also the way that I conducted business. And so when I was younger, I used to get bullied a lot. And the one thing that I wanted to make sure I did as a business owner was never put my own personal, I guess, beliefs or views or things about other people in negative light on social media to make someone feel small. I would never write a post of like how people wrote posts about me, or I would never create a fake account and blackmail someone, death threats. Like, just, there's some things that if you look at, okay, what are the things that I don't like about my life? And you can turn them into, okay, well, this is how I'm going to show up differently. This is how I'm going to lead by example. You start to go from being the victim to becoming the hero. Now, as I'm talking through all of these things, I realize that one big part of it is mindset for sure, because you have to have this big shift that you're not a victim. And I guess when you've had all these negative things happening over and over again, like I did, I thought, well, no matter how hard I try, it doesn't matter because I fuck up anyways. And I think the same thing can be said for like relationships. It can be said for the type of clients you attract. And so I guess right now, like, look at this podcast studio. Like, why do I do everything to a premium level? It's because I knew what it was like to feel like I was at the bottom, never good enough, never worthy enough. Like, there were all these things. And so the way that I show up now is I take extreme pride in everything I do. Like this podcast episode that I'm recording right now, I'm pretty sure before this run, there were at least 30 takes because I just wanted to get it right. And even though sometimes it still doesn't feel like it's perfect, I know that I'm showing up with the most intention to make it the best that I possibly can. Now, how this can apply in your own life and your own business is that you might have certain things that you're embarrassed or you're ashamed about in your past that kind of come and haunt you here and there. And I want to remind you that just because you showed up in a certain way in your past, that does not mean that is going to be you in the future. Not if you don't let it. You literally have the power to rewrite your future. Now, the past is in the past. Like, yes, there's going to be things that we're not proud of. Yes, there's going to be things that we would rather push down and avoid, but it's kind of like one of those, like a beach ball, you put it underwater for so long and you try to hold it down, eventually it's going to come flying back up. If you try and avoid or ignore these things, they will get worse and worse and worse, and they will hit you in those moments that you honestly wish that they didn't because you've just held it down for so long. And I believe that entrepreneurship and business is one of the biggest journeys of like personal development that you will ever go on, because you're always having things come up for you, and the life that you create and the results that you have are actually a reflection of your internal world and how you're feeling inside. So if you don't work on those things, if you don't heal from them or process them, then you'll start to find that they seep back in and start to destroy what feels like a good thing. Now, the other thing I found, especially with having a personal brand and sharing a bit more behind the scenes of what your life is like, when you take full ownership of who you are, where you've come from, and where you're going, all of a sudden, those fears that you're going to get found out or someone's going to hold it against you, like it holds no power because you're fully embracing every part, the highs, the lows, and even more so, realizing that in order for you to become the person that you are today, you had to go through those things. Some of the things we go through are just so terrible and you wouldn't wish them upon anyone. But then at the same time, they can ultimately become one of your biggest strengths because it builds resilience, it can build empathy, and it can help you think outside of the box. With all the shit that we've been through, right? Like business owners, I feel so much for us all. COVID and then fuel prices and war. You've almost got two ways to look at it. One is going to be the world is against us, the government's corrupt, like, what's the point of even trying? I'm absolutely done. Or you can think, well, some of these things are out of my control, but the biggest opportunity for business is to build something incredible when everything in the world feels like it's struggling. And so if you are not feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm on top of the world right now, business is great, then that's okay. Like sit in that for a moment, but think like, where are the biggest gaps in your business? What can you focus on? What can you improve? Or if you have personal things that keep coming up in these hard times, what do you need to work on? What do you need to heal? I know that I've kind of gone on this massive tangent and I'm really hoping that all of this is tying in together and making sense for you. The reason why I'm sharing this whole concept of learned helplessness with you is because you can stay a victim and you can keep blaming the world, keep blaming other people or certain circumstances for being where you are today, or you can choose to show up differently and see yourself as someone who can rewrite your future. If I were to look at who I was back in high school and the things that I'd been through and the person I was, if I stayed that way, my gosh, I'd probably not be in a good place at all. Like, I don't know if I'd be in jail, but I definitely would not be the leader I am today. And some of these negative things can lead to massive self-destruction and self-sabotage. But if you become aware of them and you find a way to make change, whether it's change in your mindset, change in your behavior, change in your beliefs, you will be able to transform your life, quite literally. And as I'm looking back on everything now, yes, some of those things have been hard and I wish they never happened, but at the same time, I wouldn't be the person I am today without them. And I know that you wouldn't be the person you are today without living the life that you have. And so this becomes your tool. This becomes your secret weapon, both in being a human and being a business owner. Because the events, the things that happen within your life, they create context. And the more context and experiences you have, the more you're able to learn, the more you're able to grow. And so before I wrap up this episode, I want to ask you one question. What is the one thing that keeps coming up for you that you've been avoiding and you know you need to address? Is it a certain pattern or behavior? It's like something keeps happening. Is it a certain person that keeps coming into your life when you know they're no good for you? Is it letting a certain behavior keep playing out even though you know you shouldn't? Is it continuing to have this toxic behavior? Is it just completely avoiding something altogether? Like, what is that one thing? Because I can promise you that if you do identify what it is and you take action on it, do something small. Like, don't think you have to solve the whole world, but like, what's one thing that you can start today to help you heal from this? or change your circumstances. Because at the end of the day, no one is coming to save you. And everything in life is a result of the actions you take. And you have everything within your power to change the way you show up and take actions that are going to align with the future you want to build and the person that you want to become. Thank you so much for taking the time to tune in to today's episode. I hope that it's left you with something to think about and improve within your own life. If you have any questions or you need someone to talk to, I'm always a DM away on Instagram at Sammy Kennedy Coach. Have an epic week and focus on that one thing that you know you need to address. I'll see you next week. Bye.